How would you explain your order's use of ritualism?
All Masonic orders use ritualism to communicate their mysteries and symbolism and the aspects of philosophical thought that they're trying to convey to their initiate. Ritualism is an essential part of any order. What form that ritualism takes can vary, but in the Egyptian rite, ritualism is of paramount importance as part of the structure of how the rite is conveyed.
Can you explain the difference between a ritual, a rite, and a ceremony?
Yes, this is important. So a ceremony is usually temporarily fixed. It's something that celebrates an occasion. A rite is a collection of cultural elements which include rituals and ceremonies, and a ritual can be anything that is a symbolic form of behaviour for a particular intent.
What would you say is the purpose of ritual?
The purpose can be anything. I think with ritual, there's always a certain amount of dissociation from the intent. It's using symbols as an analogy for something that you want to happen. It's taking things that represent the thing that you want to happen, the thing you want to manifest or embody or express. And it can be an end in itself, but usually it has an indirect relationship to a process that you're trying to encourage by the analogical use of these elements. So a ritual is something that we use to mark an occasion that ordinary life, forgive me, that ordinary life may not be enough to do, or that perhaps we feel ordinary life is not necessarily equipped to express.
What things can ritual achieve?
I would say anything if it's done correctly, for the right intentions and in the right way.
Are all rituals structured in the same way?
No, not necessarily. They all have elements of having a beginning, a middle and an end, of having a particular symbolic structure that defines the ritual. People usually have to act in particular ways. There's usually something that is worked upon, but apart from that, a ritual can have multiple elements, simple and complex.
Isn't repetition contrary to spontaneity and creativity?
Ordinarily you'd think so, but the whole point of ritual is that every time you practice something, it's never exactly the same. And usually the repetition of a ritual is a way of understanding the subtle differences that exist between one moment and another. Even when you memorise a ritual perfectly and you execute every part of it perfectly, there are always subtle differences, at the very least, in how you're perceiving the symbols that you're interacting with, the mood that you're in, the lighting, the timing, the atmosphere. Ritual is a way of anchoring experience, because experience is ever changing. So in a sense, ritual is a way of encouraging creativity, even though it might seem paradoxic, because the more you try to apply something perennial to reality, the more you learn about how reality works, and you move from cyclicity to spirality. You know, human life is lived in rounds. The cycle of the day, the cycle of the year, the cycle of the moon, the cycle of youth, adulthood, old age. Some would say death and rebirth. Everything is cycles with us. But to get a sense of progression, we need to mark those moments, those milestones in our progression in a particular way. And ritual helps us to do this. So even though we hit the same moment in time, for instance, the equinox, it's never the same year, you're never the same person, your cell structure's changed, the atmosphere's changed, the weather's different, it's a different year. You've moved on from where you were the year before, and you're moving towards somewhere that you hope will be better in the coming year. Ritual helps us to mark time, and the fact that it is the same helps us to deal with change in a better, healthier way. That's my experience of ritual.
Is the use of spontaneity and creativity possible within a ritual?
Yes, it is, and it's usually required in particular parts of the ritual. A good ritual always has room for not necessarily embellishment, but there is always an element of openness to how ritual is performed, if it's good ritual. There'll be a part where people get together and contemplate what they've just done. there'll be a part where something's conveyed, and it may be conveyed differently from one repeat to another. You may convey something to somebody and it's very smooth and easy. You may convey something to somebody else, the same thing, same part of the ritual, but it's violent and dynamic. You never know, and those differences are important to note. And that's actually encouraging of creativity.
How important is memorization in ritual?
It is important, but not to the degree that memorization should take over everything else. If you do something often enough, you will remember it, and you remember it by heart. And remembering by heart is much better than remembering in the mind. To know something by heart is to have made it a part of yourself. And I think when ritual is integrated in that way, it becomes an indelible part of your memory. And that's actually the best way of doing it. And any variations that happen in how you perhaps speak the words, the speed at which you speak them, can sometimes be tied to your intuition about the best way of communicating and expressing that ritual at that time. When you're too strict with memory, it can sometimes be counterintuitive, counterproductive, anti-creative, and fix you too much to the intellectual process of trying to remember verbatim, literatim what you've learned, instead of letting the ritual be as organic as it needs to be effective. I think it's important when you're learning. It's important, I think, with certain parts of ritual that you don't constantly have to refer to notes, especially if you're doing anything that involves physical movement through space, or if you're working with somebody else. But it shouldn't be the be-all and end-all of your mastery of something. Just because you remembered it doesn't mean that you've mastered it. And I think for some people, memorization becomes a kind of intellectual exercise rather than a means to an end.
How important is the type of symbolism used in ritual?
I think it's crucial. A ritual should reflect its symbolism perfectly, because if there's any division or conflict between the symbol and the ritual action or the ritual elements, it will create conflict in the subconscious mind of the initiate. It needs to be absolutely harmonious with the symbol it's trying to convey. In a sense, I would say that good ritual is a symbol made manifest. It's a symbol turned into action, and those actions should reflect that symbol geometrically, numerically, philosophically, and I think energetically as well. So it's absolutely crucial that symbolism and ritual are perfectly harmonious.
Does ritual always involve physical motion, or can ritual also be a mental exercise?
It can be both. There are rituals that one can learn that one performs physically at first, and then in the interior world, one can perform it mentally, and it can still have an effect on the atmosphere and effect on the self. That's something that you get to, I think, after a certain amount of competence and mastery. But to get to this stage, you need to have a command over the elements of ritual, which can only really be gained through physical ritual.
What would you say are the differences between your group ritual, as practiced in lodge, and the personal and solitary rituals your order recommends to your members?
Generally, I'd say that there are some structural differences. Obviously, you can't perform a ritual on your own that requires a mass amount of people, so there is that obvious difference. But I think also the rituals that we perform in lodge tend to be initiations or conveyances of symbols for people to bring them from one stage to another. The rituals that are done at home are to reinforce what they've received, to take it and make it part of themselves. So even though the symbolism may be similar or identical to the ritual that was performed in the lodge, the type of ritual that's done when one is on one's own is to build one's own personal relationship to that symbolic energy and to try and gain personal insights and personal relationship with those forces and elements that have been conveyed to you through the initiation.
Masonic rituals are depicted as very stable, but they are frequently edited and updated. Do you think this dilutes their original purpose and effect, or is it an evolutionary process?
I think that depends on the motivation for the changes. We're not living in the same society we lived in the 1800s. So certain things are outmoded, certain views on race, on culture, on the genders, we have evolved beyond. And I think it's important that the rituals catch up. But that notwithstanding, I think some people do over-edit the rituals. Sometimes it's because they don't understand the things that were there originally. Sometimes it can be because people just don't want to have long speeches in their rituals. They just want the rituals to be shorter so they can get to the festive board or whatever. That can be the motivation for some. For us, ritual needs to keep its integrity by being symbolically relevant to the person going through it. So in a sense, certain things should not be changed. They can be streamlined to a degree. They certainly can be modernised if the elements of the ritual in its original form contain things that we currently know are no longer true and don't feel right to pass to people. And of course, if the ritual is specific to one demographic and needs to be opened up for others, that's a perfectly fine reason to edit them. But the integrity of the ritual needs to be maintained, and I think you need a very clear, intuitive, and I think intellectual and philosophical sense of what the ritual is meant to do and why it's structured in a certain way before you should even attempt to tweak or edit anything. Because unless you know the reason why it's there and you can figure out a better reason for changing it, it should be left.
Are your only rituals those of initiation, or do you practice rituals for other purposes?
Yes, we do practice rituals for other purposes as well. Some of them are ceremonies to observe particular times of the year or particular activities, and there are rituals which I can't disclose to the public which are for other purposes.
Can a person overdo ritual?
Yes, I think they can if they become too obsessed with it. And some of the reasons people can become obsessed with ritual is because of being too perfectionist, because of competing with other people, because of habit. There are all sorts of reasons why people overuse ritual. Ritual should always be balanced with as much an equal time of rest for the time you've put into doing the ritual. I think that's something that people don't realise. A good occultist always rests for as much time as they've worked. Also, there's a reason why you can't overdo ritual, and shouldn't overdo it, because the ritual needs to have an effect on you. You need to see that effect in real, ordinary life to understand what it's doing for you. If you're constantly performing rituals, you're pulling yourself constantly into this symbolic state, and you're not letting the thing that the symbol represents become part of your reality. So you can overdo things. You can overdo anything. So one of the things that we teach is moderation, the middle path, for that exact reason.
Thank you, Grandmaster.